Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. I'm very happy to see so many bright and smiling faces. And I have a question. Who here likes chocolate? Come on now, little enthusiasm. Do we like chocolate? All right, all right. Well, you know, we're blessed to be in a business that people really enjoy, and so that's always been a blessing for us. I know this is a seminar on entrepreneurship, and I'm not sure you can really teach entrepreneurship, but you can certainly tune into it, and you can certainly become a better entrepreneur attending seminars like this. Interestingly, my story, our business's story, is somewhat different than a normal entrepreneur because I'm a third generation. And the fourth generation is actually running the business today. And that's a very, very unusual thing. You don't see that very often. So we have a founder, who was my grandmother. We have an entrepreneur, who was my dad. And we have an entrepreneurial person, me, and now the next generation. And I think each of us, fortunately, could bring something to the business that it needed at the time. And so it was a very timely and wonderful thing the way it worked out. As was explained earlier, my grandmother was born in 03, that is 1903. When she was 12 years old, her father died. And that was a tragedy. That was a serious situation. She came from a family of 3 kids. And really, there was no money to provide even food for the family. And so at 13 years old, she had to quit school and went to work, fortunately, in a little chocolate shop in Scranton. So you have a tragedy, and out of it, she starts to work. And she loved chocolate dipping. She loved the art of making chocolates. And she decided, despite the sorrow that she was going through, she decided she was going to be the best chocolate maker that ever lived. And that was a goal she drove towards. And so she learned all about the business. When she was 19 years old, she married my grandfather, who sold Packard automobiles. And Packards at the time were the Mercedes-Benz of the automobile field. So my grandfather, all through the 20s, very successful automobile salesman. My grandmother just stopped work and took care of the family. Of course, tragedy number 2 comes along. That's the Depression. And the Depression was difficult to make a living anyway, but certainly it was difficult to make a living selling luxury automobiles. And so in 1936, my grandmother decided her kids were old enough that she could start to do something to supplement the family income. And she did what she knew how to do. She started to make chocolates literally in her kitchen, on her kitchen table. And she did that from 1936 to 1946, and just doing it as a paying hobby. That's all she really drove towards. She wanted a paying hobby. Well, my dad goes into the service in World War II. Another tragedy struck. He flew in a B-17 bomber. In his very first mission, he was shot down over Austria and became a prisoner of war for 17 months. And when you were a prisoner of war back then, my grandparents didn't even know if he was alive or dead for 17 months. It was really an awful time for them. But he comes out of the service, and they give him, because he had been they hadn't even had contact with him for 17 months, he got a check from the government for $3,800. That was his back pay. And he took half of it, and he bought a brand new car, which you could do for half that then. And the other half, he put in the bank. And he came home one day, and my grandmother was making chocolates in her kitchen. And he said, you know, I think this could be made into a business. And my grandmother said, you're crazy. I'm just doing this to earn some extra money. He said, well, I'll tell you what. If you'll accept me as a partner, I'll put the other half of my back pay in the business and we'll start a real business. And my grandmother said, okay, we'll do that, and off they went. The business remained from 1946 to 1962, basically in my grandmother's home, although there were additions put on, the business grew a little bit. But it was very much a struggle, very difficult to earn a living, a good living. Another tragedy struck in 1962 because they got a notice that their home, the home that my grandmother was making and everybody was making the chocolates in, was going to be taken out by the construction of Interstate 81. It was being built then. And they were forced to move. And this was a tragic time. I was 11 years old, and I can remember this like it was yesterday. There was talk that they might have to close the business because they didn't know. You know, they were moving. It was going to be expensive, disruptive. They weren't sure they could continue the business. But they decided, yes, we'll continue. This was my dad's determination. And he found a place, he found a parcel of land to buy at the exit of a highway. And nobody had really ever seen an exit before. This was revolutionary. And he bought the property, built a building, and reopened in 1962. And that is the date when the business really started to grow. Because it was no longer in a house in the backwoods, you know, it was now a prominent company in a prominent location. And that made all the difference in the world. So where I'm going here is that you have these tragedies that happen. My grandmother's father dying, you have the tragedy of the Depression, you have the tragedy of getting shot down in a B-17. But in each case, they took it and made something good out of it. And that, I think, is something to be said to everyone here. If when life hands you lemons, if you can make lemonade, I think it's a blessing. It's a good thing. So anyway, the business when we moved in 1962 was doing about $125,000 worth of business a year. And you know, I always say there were gas stations in town that did more business, so this was not a big business. In the 1960s, my grandparents retired, and in 1971, I came in the business. My dad, I was astonished when I was 3 months out of Penn State and working in the business, he asked me to be his partner. And I was flabbergasted, I was thrilled, because I loved the business, I wanted to be there. When I went in 1971, we were making about 250,000 pounds of chocolate a year. So you can see the business is starting to grow, because that was enough to really make a living, for sure. And we were partners, my dad and I were partners from 71 to 92. When he retired, he sold me the rest of the business. And he retired and went on with his life. And just this past June, I retired and sold the rest of the business to the fourth generation. Now, in the interim, from 1971 to when I first went in, and when at the very peak of the business in 2017, 4 years ago, we were manufacturing at the peak about 42 million pounds of chocolate a year. So you can see there's a substantial growth for sure. And it was not certainly my work alone, but a great group of people that I worked with too, and led, that really were behind that kind of growth. In 2017, the business had gotten so big, and I had to go back. We had developed a specialized product which we called ice cream inclusions, and this was in the 90s, in the 1990s, that was very special in the sense that it was very small, it had a center in it, and it was very palatable in ice cream. And if you're ice cream eaters, I said, are you chocolate eaters? If you're ice cream eaters, you'd be familiar probably with the little fish in Ben & Jerry's fish food ice cream. Well, we made them. If you're familiar with the peanut butter cups and Moose Tracks ice cream, we made every one. If you're familiar with the peanut butter cups and Ben & Jerry's peanut butter cup ice cream, we made them. And we remain the only people in the world that had the technology, which we developed, to manufacture this product. And that product went from 0 to something around 35 million pounds a year. And this attracted a lot of attention in the industry, and many people were interested in buying that off of us. And so we sold the ingredients business back in 2017. And that comes back to, and by the way, we kept the brand, which is Gertrude Hawk Chocolates, the stores and so on. And because I would never sell that. I mean, that is my heritage. I feel that that's kind of an heirloom, something to be taken care of and preserved. And so we kept that part of the business and we sold the ingredients business. And that enabled us to establish permanently endowing the Hawk Family Foundation. And so we are now in a new building and really back to where kind of our roots are. And I'm very happy to say we're doing very well. So are there questions? Can I answer any questions? Well, having heard none, I would just say to you, I love this kind of a program because I think it plants the idea, the possibility of establishing a business. And I can't imagine anything you can do more important than that, is to establish a seed. Because the backbone of our economy is small business. Small business is continually growing and changing and adapting to the times, and that's what entrepreneurship is all about. So I'll close with just one thought more, and that is, I'll go back to where I began, and that is, the business was founded by our founder. The business's entrepreneur was my dad, and I'm certainly an entrepreneurial character, but I would never call myself an entrepreneur. And the reason I wouldn't is because I wouldn't have put up with the terrible stress my dad did working through the early years of the business. But it was that determination that really made the thing work. And so that's really what it takes. Thank you so much.